Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we have back and ready for today's special guest. He's the host of the Blackhawks Talk podcast, ESPN 1000 Hockey Show, and Blackhawks Pre and Postgame coverage on NBC Sports Chicago. Please welcome Pat Boyle to the program. Pat, great to have you on. How are you?
Jon, great to be on with you once again, and congrats on all the success with the show.
Thank you so much, Pat. Really great to have you on. What do you make of the Hawks' tumultuous season, first off?
I've been doing this, in this business for 30 years. This is my 30th year. This is my 11th covering the Blackhawks in the role that I'm in as the pre-post host. It's by far the most difficult I've ever had to deal with everything that went on off the ice, which of course was, just tragic as the details became available to us through the report, and then what happened on the ice and the changes that were made in the front office and behind the bench, and then the product on the ice. You put it all together, a very eventful year, a very difficult year. I guess if I'm looking at some of the silver lining on the back end of it, I do believe there's finally a plan for this team to get back to where we're accustomed to seeing them, and that's back in the Stanley Cup playoffs, competing for the Stanley Cup. I think they've been meandering, to say the least, over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think now under Kyle Davidson's leadership, there's a plan, and we'll see if that plan can produce championships.
What is that plan?
Well, the plan is a rebuild, and it's the word that nobody wants to use. Maybe they don't want to use it at Hallis Hall, but it's reality, and it's. Some of it is the byproduct of going for it when you were trying to keep that dynasty going, winning the 3 cups in 6 years. You give up some number 1 picks along the way to add some players to make that Stanley Cup playoff run. You lose players in a draft like that you drafted in the first round, like Philip Deneau, who would be great in a Blackhawks jersey right now, who's in a top 6 role with the LA Kings and played great for Montreal the last couple of years. You give up him and a 2nd round pick for 2 guys, Weiss and Fleischman, at the trade deadline, who barely played for the Blackhawks. Didn't work out. At the time, you say they're going for it, but those players are no longer in your system. And things might be different. We're talking differently if you didn't have to lose those. So some of this is a byproduct of going for it. Some of it is, bottom line, not great drafting. At the end of the day, the draft where they take Adam Boquist and Nicholas Beaudin in the first round, 2 kind of undersized defensemen. They've moved on from Boquist. Beaudin is still in Rockford. Are those misses? Well, if you said goodbye to one of them already, and we haven't seen the other yet play much in the National Hockey League, the jury's still out on that. So some of it is the lack of decision of going for it. And in the last few years, we've heard rebuild, we've heard retool, and then we've seen things like getting Seth Jones and Marc-Andre Fleury, which don't signal a rebuild at all. So I think under Kyle Davidson, you've got a young general manager, thinks outside the box, and we can get into some of that as well. I think this addition of Jeff Greenberg from the Cubs, which on paper sounds crazy somewhat, but when you hear the reasoning behind it, it makes a lot of sense.
What do you think Stan Bowman thought about before this season? Because as you mentioned, they kind of went all in and then it ended the way it did. How do you think that even happened?
Well, I think he was GMing for his job. I don't think it's unlike what Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy were probably doing in their final year in Chicago. That's when an organization sticks with a regime, a front office, or a coach for that extra year, it doesn't just affect that immediate year. It affects years after, because, deals were made in their final year to go for it. They realize that they're under the gun, so to speak, and they need to get in the playoffs and they need to produce, or they're going to be looking for work. And so I think in Stan's case, he saw a number one defenseman be available in Seth Jones. And let's be honest, those aren't plentiful in the National Hockey League. Now, how great of a number one defenseman, we can debate that a little bit. I don't think he's elite, but I think Seth Jones is in that next tier. Now you can debate how much do you give up for it. I had an issue with the Hawks swapping their first round pick with Columbus in the first round of last summer's draft. That would have kept them in a 10 to 12 spot in the draft. And there were two first round goaltenders that were slotted to go in that space. And they ended up going in there. And that could have been your goalie for the future. So swapping those first picks with Columbus made the Blackhawks pick at the end of the first round. And they ended up, taking a player that many had projected to go in the second. So, to me, it was Stan, who was GMing for his job, Marc-Andre Fleury coming off a Vezina Trophy season. If you are truly in a rebuild and the year prior, you said, we're going to let the kids play. We're going to let Delia and Lankinen, battle for this and figure it out. And you said goodbye to Corey Crawford and you said goodbye to Robin Leonard. It doesn't make a ton of sense to go get Marc-Andre Fleury. And then, oh, by the way, it really just camouflages the bevy of issues that this team has, because even with great goaltending for a majority of the season under Marc-Andre Fleury, they still finished with the sixth worst record in the NHL.
Why is the defense so bad for the Hawks?
Well, part of it has been, I think, the defensive system that they've been playing the last few years. And under Joel Quenneville, they played a more zone coverage. And simply put, there's usually a defenseman that's always in front of the net. The other defenseman is released to go to the side where the puck is, and you protect the house. You protect the prime real estate in front of the goaltender. Under Jeremy Colleton, he played a man-on-man. He called it a man-on-man and a half system. And to put that simply to the audience, it's basically covering a player and sorting as you go about it. But the problem is players don't, like in football, they'll run a route and you're on him man-to-man throughout. Well, as a forward makes his way through the zone, he may go to the corner. He may go below the goal line. He may come out to the blue line. All of a sudden, if you're a defenseman who picks up a winger who was in prime real estate, but now works his way below the goal line or out to the blue line, when do you release him? When do you stop following? And then you're vacating this prime real estate. So if you remember the last couple of years, they were allowing so many high danger chances, so many slot chances, because of the problems with the man-on-man system. So now you ask, well, okay, why didn't they adjust? Part of it was, I think, like the Seabrooks and the Duncan Keiths they've been defending a certain way for, 12 years under Joel Quenneville, and they were used to Joel's system. So then this new system comes in and it takes some time to getting used to. Oh, those players move on, and then you look at, do we have the players that can skate and play this man-on-man and a half? Because roughly half to 2/3 of the league plays this as somewhat of a version of the man-on-man and a half. And then when Derek King took over, he said, enough is enough. It's not working. He modified it, and they brought more of a zone approach to it, where you would see a defenseman stay in front of the net and protect that zone and not wander off. And at times, under Jeremy Colleton, you would see two defensemen below the goal line. I mean, you can't score usually from below the goal line. And, those were, to me, that's been the biggest issue. So it got cleaned up a little bit under Derek King. The next coach, and Derek King is in the mix for that. I don't necessarily think they're going to go in that direction with Derek, but the next coach is going to have to pick a system that not only works, philosophy wise for the franchise, but works with the personnel he has.
Pat Boyle here on Sports Talk Chicago. Pat, do you think Derek King did enough to put himself in that conversation to become the permanent head coach?
He did enough to put himself in the conversation, no question about it. You look at the circumstances that he took over, and we touched on it earlier with how difficult things were with the off-ice issues and the report coming out and the start that they had 1-9-2. When he took over, Derek King said, this is a fragile team. He said when he got the call in Rockford that he was going to take over on a Sunday, he watched the Friday night game and he saw a team that when they got down by a goal or two, the camera panned the bench and he's like, I could see that that's a fragile team. So he was the right coach at that time for this team. He kind of had to pick these guys up from getting knocked down on the schoolyard and build their confidence up a little bit, try to get them to start having a little more fun. And that approach worked. They got a few wins under their belt for the better part of the season under Derek King. Up until the trade deadline, they were a 500 to just slightly north of 500 team. Now that would not have got you into the Stanley Cup playoffs, but that was more where we projected this team to be, somewhere that 10-9 seed and possibly, if things broke their way, make a run at one of the two wild card spots. That obviously didn't pan out, certainly with that horrendous start. So he's in the mix, but if you listen to Kyle Davidson and Norm McIver and now Jeff Greenberg, that's the brain trust on the hockey ops side for the Blackhawks, you get the understanding or belief that they want somebody that's going to grow with this team. They don't want one coach to come in and take the beating in the so-called tank years or the real difficult years, and then to hand the keys over to a veteran coach to take them to the next level. I think they're looking more for the coach that has some development skills, that can command a room. And, that's something I think like that Colleton struggled in. I don't think he came in with enough cachet for a locker room that had at that time, a few Hall of Famers in it and the guys with a lot of Stanley Cup hardware. This next coach, now they're down to two, and we can discuss that a little bit further, the future of Kane and Toews. But the next coach that comes in needs to command respect in that room. His message needs to be understood by the players, and then they have to go out and implement that message. So I think they're looking for somebody maybe a little younger than Derek King and somebody that's going to grow much with this team as they try to take it, and reinvent themselves as a championship team.
Is there anyone specific you have in mind right now?
I look around. I think they're going to go with the like the Rod Brindamore type. I think they're going to go with somebody who has some experience, but who is his personality fits the style of play that they want. And I asked that directly to Norm McIver. I said, do you believe that coaches in the National Hockey League, that their personality is on display by their team on the ice? And he said, absolutely. More times than not, the personality of the coach is the way the team plays. So I think they're going to look at a coach that has that approach that they want to see. And we hear the buzzwords that Kyle Davidson is looking for. He wants this team to improve in the speed department, in the compete department. Too many times in the last 5 or 6 years, the Hawks have brought in players that are highly skilled but have zero compete level. And I can go down a laundry list, but we know those players, and you see them, where you see a flash of like, wow, that was a nice play. And then you don't see him for the rest of the game. And then you make the deal for him and you're like, well, a change of scenery. He was a He was a top 10 pick in Buffalo. Maybe a change of scenery here in Chicago. That maybe sort of worked out for Dylan Strome, but I can show you 4 or 5 examples where it didn't work out here. So I think this next coach, I don't think it's going to be a Barry Trotz. I really don't think you're going to see them go after somebody like that. I think they're going to go after, a coach with experience, more on the younger side, someone who's into development, someone who buys into analytics, because this team, as it's currently comprised, its front office believes that the National Hockey League, John, is 10 to 12 years behind Major League Baseball. They think there's a quantum gap between the processes and the systems that are in place in the National Hockey League and those that are in place in other leagues. That's why they went after a guy like Jeff Greenberg. They're trying to, change this old school approach where you look around the National Hockey League and you see the Brian Burks and the Jim Rutherfords, and look, they've got great resumes, but do you think they're at the cusp of analytics and trying to do things differently? I tend to believe that's not the case. I think the NHL is behind the times quite a bit in this area. That's why I think they recycle the Tortorellas and others, over the years. And I think that that's something that the Blackhawks are trying to get away from. So this new coach has to also align with the new ideals and the new thoughts of a franchise that thinks that they're cutting edge in this department.
How do Kane and Toews factor into these plans?
Well, that's to me the biggest issue this offseason. You've got Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, and Alex DeBrincat all entering the final years of their deal. I think we can all admit that Alex DeBrincat has shown that he's an elite player, elite goal scorer in this league, with another 40 goal effort in his arsenal, and on a team that was offensively challenged. And when you're trying to defend the Blackhawks, there's really only 2 guys you need to worry about, and that's Alex DeBrincat and Patrick Kane. So to see Alex perform at that level, that's a bright spot. He is, you would want to keep him obviously long-term. What is his appetite to stay here? And I think a lot of that is attached to Patrick Kane. And my thought on this is, people are saying to me, well, Pat, how could Patrick Kane, how can you keep him here if you're truly in a rebuild? Well, the only way I can answer that is if I can say said player can be an important component to a championship team when they get back to that, then I can make a case that you hold on to him. I can make a case that age 30, he'll be 34 in November, Patrick Kane will. I can make a case that this team is going to be competing for a cup in 4 years, say, maybe 5. I think Patrick Kane's going to play till he's 40. His style of play, John, is not one that is beating on his body because he goes to the corners and mixes it up. The rules have changed to help benefit a player like him. He's never been built on a speed game. He's been built on his hands and his passing and his accurate shot. So and the way he takes care of his body, it is from that Brady-esque camp that, we've seen now produce championships on the other side of 40. I think Patrick is that type of athlete. I think he's that type of star. So I can say you can keep him in the fold. And at the end of the day, you still have to sell tickets. I still feel when I turn on a Blackhawks game or go see them in person, he's still worth the price of admission, in my opinion. I still think he is that talented. It's funny, John, watch the NHL draft this year or take a look at last year's or even the previous 2. And I'm not kidding you. Over half of the draft candidates, when they're asked who is their hockey idol, they say Patrick Kane. They're still saying it in 2022. Usually the shelf life, or you move on to the next superstar. the Trevor Zegrases, and they're still talking about Patrick Kane. There's something to that. He's a magical player. We've been privileged to see it for 15 seasons here. So I would like to see him stay for many reasons. Some of those are selfish because, these are going to be some lean times, and I'd like some positivity to talk about on that post-game show every once in a while. But Jonathan Toews is probably a different story, John. I think he says his best years are still in front of him. The statistics don't line up with it. The eye test doesn't necessarily line up with it. John just turned 34. He got better as the season went on. I don't think when you take a year and a half off from any sport that you're going to come back at the level that you expect to be. I just, there's being in shape, and then there's being in hockey shape. And I think that's what Jonathan tried to work throughout this season. So he's a different case for me. I don't know how much you could get for Jonathan Toews on the market right now. I still think he has a value to the team as far as when I look around that building, all the 19 and 88 jerseys. I mean, if those two players are gone, those jerseys, and some are still going to be there. Those fans are still coming in. That would be interesting to me to see, how the fan base would adapt to those two cornerstones not being a part of it. So, conversations I would have with those two are, hey, look, I know. And look, every single one of them said, hey, look at what New York has done. Look what the LA Kings have done. You say it's going to take 4 to 5 years, but they turned it around quicker. Those are some examples. Those teams also have some unique circumstances that surround them and have landed some generational players, including one Artemi Panarin that should never have gotten away from the Blackhawks. So, the players say, the team says rebuild. We think we can expedite it. The team is saying well, that's what players say. We're going to be honest with them. We're going to tell them where we're at. And, I think they're going to give Jonathan and Patrick the opportunity to decide if they want to be a part of this long term, but it's got to be on the team's terms. It's going to be Alex DeBrincat that's going to be making around $10 million a year. I think Patrick is still going to command somewhere between $8 and $9 million a year, depending on how long the deal is. And then Jonathan is a different story. He's going to be, more of a third line center. And, I wouldn't do a very long-term deal with Jonathan. I'd even let this season play out. They hold the cards. They have the no movement clauses. So they don't have to, they're not going to be blindsided by any change. It's going to be their call this final year. I could see Patrick Kane playing out this final season. And, at the trade deadline, if he sees that this has just been an arduous, rough season, and at age 34, he wants another bite at the apple, I could see him saying, look, the New York Rangers, they want to make a deadline move. You could probably pick up this and this. You'll get something for Patrick Kane, whether it's a rental or a long-term deal. You're certainly going to get more if he's under contract. But I could see him saying, you know what, now that I've been in this rebuild mold for over a year now, maybe it's not my jam. I'd like to go somewhere else. And then he goes somewhere, and I'm just throwing out a team like the Rangers, makes a run with them, and then it's question whether or not they can fit him under their salary cap going forward.
Pat Boyle still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Pat, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, Pat Boyle, what did you make of his retirement?
Well, first of all, we've been lucky in this town to have some incredible broadcasters over the years. And if, we play that game in sports radio every once in a while, the Mount Rushmore thing, to me, Pat Foley is on it here in Chicago. 39 seasons. I think it's parts of 5 decades that he was behind the mic, both as the radio and TV voice for the Blackhawks. John, rarely in this business do you, get to call the games of your hometown team. He literally, went to Loyola, went to Michigan State, his first job out of Michigan State was in Grand Rapids. His dad was a part of a dealership on the North Shore, and one of the Wirtz family members would get their car service there. He has the cassette tape of Pat doing Grand Rapids games and says, give this kid a listen. The next thing you know, Bill Wirtz's secretary is calling him. And the one thing I thought was interesting, Pat said when he was telling his buddies that he was up for this job back in 1979, he said, guys, I'm not only going to get this job, but I'm going to have this job for like 25 years. So he had that confidence even at a young age. And then, oh, by the way, he surpassed those 25 years by quite a bit. To me, he's old school. I love the fact that the ebb and flow of the game matched the energy level of Pat. If it was a slugfest and just not much going on and, a 1-0 game and not a lot of scoring chances, you could just flip on the TV or radio and tell that from Pat's voice. But boy, oh boy, if it was an exciting game, if it was Toews for the game winner in St. Louis in the Stanley Cup playoffs, his anticipatory calls where you'd see Toews pick up the puck at center ice, and by the blue line, Foley's like, here's Toews for the win. Hawks win! Hawks win! I mean, that stuff, like, you're just, like, it lifts you out of your seat. And it was just awesome. And to be, partners with him in a pre-post intermission role, and to be able to see that firsthand for me now the last, 2 decades has been incredible. So it was an amazing run. I don't think we've heard the last of Pat. I don't know what capacity we'll see him in next, if he'll decide to do some things with the Blackhawks, or if he decides to, if somebody, TNT or whoever says, hey, would you call X number of games for us? I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him do that. I can tell you one thing, John, you will see him on a golf course near you, because the man has earned some time away from the microphone. That's one thing he noticed this season, that he just didn't think he was built to keep doing 82 games. I don't know about that, but I give him a toast. I thought it was a classy way to, the way the Blackhawks sent him off. I thought it was one of the better pregame ceremonies, and then kind of carrying it through, the players on the ice, the Hawks win, and the giveaway. Have you ever seen a giveaway at the United Center actually match the honoree more than a vessel to toast Pat Foley? Like, it was very apropos, and thought it was a pretty cool scene. So cheers to Pat Foley. We were lucky to hear him for 39 years. Hopefully it's not the last we've heard of him.
And Pat, before we finish up today, last question. What was your favorite game on television as a kid?
Wow. So, okay, you're going old school. Back then, you had either Atari or Intellivision. Okay, those were the two competing games. And I remember getting Intellivision. I remember playing it so much, the unit would heat up so much that, like, to the touch, it would burn your finger. Like, you could cook a steak on this thing when it was done. I don't remember too many of the games. I think Astro Smash might have been one that I played back in the day. So yeah, I'll go with Astro Smash as my favorite Intellivision game.
Pat, thank you so much for joining me. Great interview, great insights on the Blackhawks too. Best wishes for covering them in the future. Looking forward to the next time we chat as well.
Take care, John. We'll see you later on in the summer.